Yo, what is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Roster Reconstruction. I'm your host, Corban. Follow me on Twitter at CorbinNBA. And listen, y'all, I'm pumped. By the time you listen to this, we've already started our draft coverage. We had Eric Weiss on for more of a deep dive on just bigger draft themes from his experience in NBA front offices and just not talking about specific players, but what front offices look for, how players stand out, the whole process. Now we're going to get really into the draft here and really into prospects, and I'm gonna have scouting reports coming out. We're gonna get into the thick of it, but I am so pumped, y'all, to have on someone I have looked up to for a while for draft coverage. Hopefully, if you're into basketball, if you're into this show, you have to be aware of Floor and Celing on YouTube. Check it out, literally Floor and Celing NBA Draft. All this content will come up. Follow him on Twitter at Wilko MCV. It's the man, the myth, the legend himself, Wilko. Sir, how are you doing, my friend? How are you?
I'm doing well, man. Appreciate you having me on. Appreciate all the kind words for sure. Yeah, looking forward to talking some draft.
Oh, absolutely, man. Yeah, like I said, love your video work. You, Keandre, are two of the best in my mind in terms of people I'm privileged to have had on the show before and talk to, but also can just put all your videos in a playlist and just binge it. So really do appreciate that, man. Definitely. And I don't want to actually start there. You've been doing this at least a couple of years, maybe longer, and I'm not aware, but I kind of want to get a little bit background into how you got into this, how long you've been doing it, what kind of was your inspiration. Can you give us a little bit more about yourself in the basketball space?
Yeah, man, definitely. I think I've been around basketball really all my life. I was born in Spain, grew up in Spain for a little bit too, so kind of been familiar with the game, ever since I was born. Played basketball some in high school as I got older and such, but never really, could make it to any type of level or anything like that. But I knew I always wanted to, stay around the game in some way. Always been following it, obviously, but I knew that, once the pandemic hit and everything was a little uncertain there for everyone for a minute, I sort of knew that I really, was trying to break into this basketball space. And, the draft had been something that I had been interested in for years now, but it had been sort of a casual interest, something, more in the background, something where, I would do my own research, come up with my own draft board, stuff like that, but nothing too public. But then, ESPN bought Draft Express, and that had been sort of my main resource, all throughout high school and I think maybe my first couple years of college or something like that, where Draft Express was, my go-to for everything draft related. But once ESPN acquired them, I sort of felt for a minute that there was, a space in the draft community that wasn't particularly active anymore. Twitter was great, but I thought that YouTube could definitely, use something a little extra. So that's how I started, just trying to, kick a door in there, you could say. I think this is my fourth draft now doing coverage. So it's been great. It's been fun. This entire journey has taken me to games and gyms and talk to people that I didn't think I would be speaking to. So it's definitely been awesome.
Bro, like I said, you've made a way for yourself and then some in this, and that is really, really cool. And thank you for sharing that, because way to kind of see a need in the content space, put your own expertise in it, and now, like I said, one of the best in the biz. So definitely appreciate it. And that we're going to use that expertise here now, because I want to ask you about this draft. I've heard a lot. I've been fortunate. This year has been the first year I can say that I've really followed draft coverage and for my own opinions, my own big board and everything from the beginning of the cycle. Normally, I want to say the last year I did it around March Madness, the last couple of years, a little bit after that. This year, I really wanted to start going into that space. And so I've been happy to kind of do, like you said, for my own opinions, have my own board and all of that. But you hear it, I somebody who also is an NBA sicko, like I listen to draft pods and I'm, trying to be in the know, if you will. And, both from people who I look up to and people who are just people on Twitter, Facebook, NBA, Facebook, geez, but wherever, you hear about this draft, there's a certain stigma around it, right? About it being a really bad draft, just not really high-end top talent, different things, depending on who you talk to. Some will be like, no, it's actually a perfectly fine draft. I'm like, interesting. But I want to get your take on what you think this draft class is from your own read of it. And also, I mean, if you were to compare it to another draft class historically, what would you compare it to?
Sure. Let me just say before anything, NBA Facebook, I get what you're saying, but I think I think NBA Instagram might be, a little bit worse even sometimes, but
You you ain't lying, my friend.
but I digress. This draft is an interesting one because I've seen it tossed around a few times. This idea where it's more so a draft that you use to help build a team, but you're not building a team around whoever you select in this draft. I think that makes a lot of sense because I look up and down my big board, and this is something that I'm doing, every day now as we get into the thick of it.
Mm,
So I'm looking at it every day. I'm, shifting people up and down every day, more or less. And I think it's a pretty deep draft. There are a lot of guys who I could see having fairly long NBA careers. There are a lot of guys with skill sets who are pretty scalable, but next to other, star players or primary initiators, if you will, whatever you want to call them. But just the guy who's going to have the ball in his hands the most probably is not going to be whoever is selected from this draft. But whoever
mhm.
you do pick, is probably going to fit around that guy who has the rock. So I don't mind that. But it's funny that you ask this. It's something that I've been thinking a lot, especially,
Mhm.
with the Mavs series. Um, I look at Derek Lively, right? And
Yeah.
he was someone who I was super high on last year. Like at one point, I had him in top 5 consideration because I just really thought that his defensive potential was very unique in his draft class. And
Mhm.
then from a center standpoint, sure, he doesn't necessarily do anything very flashy on the court, but I just thought that his NBA translation could be super effective, especially, going onto the same team as Luca.
Yeah.
So around December or January or something like that, I put a poll up on Twitter and I asked people if they were higher on Lively coming out of Duke or if they would be higher on Alex Sarr, who many people have as the number one prospect in this draft. Right now, personally, I might have Lively over Sarr, to be honest. And that was my opinion a few months ago. It still
Mhm.
is. So, to give you an idea of the strength of this draft, I think that is more or less, my comparison.
Okay. I like that. The way you did it. I think like it's not quite like analytical approach and like breaking it down, looking back and going, okay, plug and play in terms of these guys and where their best fit is. I like that. So basically, like you said, not someone that is the sole fulcrum of a team potentially, but several people who can be like a very good addition to that.
Definitely. And, even some of the wings at the top of the draft, right? Like, I think you hear three big names right now Buzelis, Holland, and then Lisa Scher out of France.
Yes.
So, all three of those guys, I don't see any of them, to be honest, as somebody who's going to be a number one option down the line. Like, in a best case scenario, probably a number two option is
Okay.
somewhat likely. Probably more so for Ron Holland than either of the other two guys. But
Makes sense.
even then, like I feel as though a lot of development would need to take place. So
Yeah.
all of these guys who are like towards the top of my draft board, if I had to kind of like name a tier, it would probably be like some guys who I believe are like right below that all-star level,
Okay.
but who are going to be all-star candidates at some point in their career.
I like that, and that still is a high end outcome considering what people have kind of pegged this draft as, right? Like at the end of the day, you still have some really good talent there, even if you are all star. Like that's, I'm sorry, how many teams wish they had one right now? Like Detroit, right? Like just tossing one out. Charlotte obviously has had one in Lamelo Ball, but they would want more. So no, I agree, 100%. I appreciate giving some context there as well because when you hear the talk about this, and yes, it's not. I think maybe it's. In fact, let me phrase it as a question to you. Do you think there's so much kind of ragging on this draft because of the draft that preceded it that makes it so that he gets a lot of flack? Or do you think this would be one that, even in a normal year, let's say 2018, would just be like a random draft?
No, that's valid for sure. Like, there's definitely some truth to what you're saying, and yeah, like definitely the fact that we were just coming off what seems at least like a really great draft,
Mm-hmm.
it definitely does, kind of play into how people perceive this upcoming draft. But also on top of that, I think something that sort of, brings out that contrast even
Mhm.
more is the fact that next year's class in the 2025 NBA draft looks really, really good. And even in 2026, you can say that some of those prospects down the line are looking very tasty.
That's true.
But with this year's draft, like you're not really seeing anybody who is that juicy, maybe, or who, you're thinking, all right, if I draft this guy, I'm getting an absolute steal, I'm getting an absolute all-star. You're not really thinking that. But with last year's draft, with next year's draft, you probably are thinking that. And in turn, this year's draft looks weaker. But really, I just think it's less, top heavy and more depth oriented.
That makes sense. Okay. And I like that. Again, that just means there's value to be found for those who do the work. And I mean, now with this new draft, you have 2 days to do it, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's gonna be interesting seeing that second night. I don't know, like even just with the combine earlier this week, right? Like, I feel like you really have to be into the NBA draft to watch that type of content.
Mhm.
And I'm not sure how successful it's gonna be for ESPN to have a separate night two
Mhm.
of the draft. Not to like deviate from the topic here,
Oh,
but
no, please. Yeah.
I almost feel as though I'm sure ESPN is hoping that Bronny James falls to that second night because otherwise, I'm not really sure what their coverage is going to consist of this year.
Yeah, they're giving so much buzz right now to a guy who, I mean, we're gonna do a lottery mock draft here in a minute. He's not in that. He's not at the end of the first round, probably not early in the second. Like, and that's not even to rag on him. I feel bad for him because he, like, Bronny hasn't done anything specifically to get this flack, other than have the same last name as the all-time league scorer, right? But it's true, like a lot of NBA and ESPN's coverage is skewed toward that. And before we even get to that's another question, and that's why I think it's so refreshing to get your content. I talked about Kendra Hoop Intellect, No Ceilings, other Nick there's other great like draft people independent in the space. How do you like, is there a way that draft coverage can improve on the national level? I know I'm throwing a haymaker of a question to you from randomly, but like so much of it, because you're right, we're gonna all tune into the draft, and I don't know how you do come draft time, but like I basically have the draft on ESPN or TV or whatever, and then I will have on like one or several alternate draft streams of people I've been following to get the actual analysis that I know I'm not going to get. But is that just something that the modern media just can't do? Like, what do you think is the reasoning there? Because you're right, like over these 2 days, that's an issue if Bronny is not taken. Like a lot of their second day, I'm sure swings on that.
Yeah, it's tough, right? Like it's very tough because so much goes into it as well, where from the outside it can be, difficult to give like an educated opinion on it. But I think that like from my perspective at least, it comes down to a couple of things. The first one being that it's been tough for ESPN to find genuine draft analysts who are very comfortable, being on a broadcast for an extended period of time. I thought they had that covered with Mike Schmitz in previous years,
Mm-hmm.
but the Blazers hired him. And then, they have Jonathan Givony now, and Jonathan, is one of the best in the business, and he's one of the hardest working guys out there. But, putting all of that draft coverage on one person is a lot.
Yeah.
So, it's tough too. It's tough for ESPN to find somebody who, is aware of their, production customs and, can fit into their schedule and contractually make sense and all of these things. And like, you know, theoretically, it's a lot easier to find people who are willing to go on camera and talk about the draft. But
Mhm.
when you actually have to do it on, national or international TV like ESPN, it becomes a lot harder for them to pull off the logistics too.
Yeah.
So I don't know. There's a lot to be worked on. There's a lot to be improved on, but it ultimately just has to come at a level that's way above either out of our pay grades. So until that happens, and I'm hoping it happens. I'm
Yeah.
hoping it happens because even this weekend or this past week, I should say, with Bronny, right? Like you mentioned the no ceilings guys earlier, and I think it was Tyler Rucker who posted about this on Twitter, and
Mhm.
we talked about it a little bit. Like I think that if ESPN hadn't, sort of drilled down viewers' faces that Bronny James was at the combine,
Yeah,
I don't think the casual viewer tunes into the combine otherwise,
that's fair.
because they're not, going to know or necessarily care, if KJ Simpson has an amazing scrimmage, right? Because, best case scenario, he'll be like end of the first round pick.
Mm-hmm.
And he doesn't have a great following or anything. So like I can understand why casuals wouldn't necessarily be interested in that.
Yeah.
But then it's down to ESPN once you secure the attention of, the neutral viewer or however you want to call them, have the resources there to be able to give, more accurate information, allow people to head into draft nights with realistic expectations. Like
Mm-hmm.
one of the things that I saw this week was how Bronny had like the most bets to go number one or something like that, right? Like
Yeah,
with
wild.
informed coverage, you don't make a decision to place your money on that happening. So I don't know, it's a whole thing that we can get into.
Oh no, you're right. And I'm glad. I just wanted to touch briefly, and I appreciate the extra insights you've given because you're right. Like it's a whole, it's a web. Like I asked that question knowing there's so many, like so much deeper that can go, right? But all in all, like I said, glad we have at least some avenues of which to have that coverage. And I appreciate you bringing out the more nuance that there is there to be had, because again, it's easy to be like draft coverage sucks. I've said it, but like, or national draft coverage sucks. Let me rephrase it. But ultimately, like you said, there's a little bit more to that. So appreciate that, man. But I guess now we can kind of turn our attention more to this draft specifically. Obviously, talked about the strength of it, and now we're gonna kind of put in practice a little lottery mock draft. So I'm excited. Just gonna go through 1 through 14, and just taking turns going back and forth. I think it's gonna be interesting because a lot of teams, I think, from Atlanta going number 1 to Charlotte dropping number 6, Detroit staying at number 5, San Antonio 2 picks in the top 10. Like, there's a lot of interesting scenarios here. And I look forward to going back and forth with you on this and kind of seeing what your selection is, why you think that fit is. I know you dropped a mock draft recently, so that is in mind. I think definitely check that out. In fact, I'll put the link to the description of that in the show for those who don't know, because that's a good one. But I think what will be interesting too is having someone else to go back off and kind of react on that. So especially with my take, because I have one guy I'm really, really high on, and I think it's gonna be interesting. But let's do it. I'm ready. Yes, sir. Let's go. I'm humped. You got the number 1 overall pick, my friend. You have the Atlanta Hawks. What are they doing? Where do you go with this?
I think Atlanta is going to go with Alex Sarr.
Mm-hmm.
He's not number 1 on my personal big board. He's more around the top 5, but
Same.
I think this fit just makes a lot of sense for them with or without Trae Young. If you have Trae, then, you have a pick and roll partner for him. In theory, you have somebody who can kind of cover up his defensive limitations and whatnot. But if Atlanta does trade Trae Young, then Sarr is, the big that most teams, I think, have number 1 on their boards. He's somebody who projects pretty versatile on both ends. And I really like that idea of pairing him with Jalen Johnson, regardless of what happens with Trae. So I'm going to go with Alex Sarr at 1.
I like that too. I feel like it's so interesting because, yes, Atlanta has options, but Alex Sarr kind of stands out as like the best fit for them, given where they are, whether they decide to do a full rebuild, whether they decide to do more of a quote unquote reloading. Like, I feel like you're right. Like, he's the guy that makes the most sense. So, yeah, definitely with you on that. I think that's a good pick for sure. Number 2, we're going back and forth, y'all. I know if I said it before, but just a reminder. So I have the Washington Wizards. Listen, where they need help, I mean, you could look at a few places, right? I mean, you have guard. I mean, Jordan Poole had a pretty rough year. Tyus Jones, I think, is a free agent this year. Kyle Kuzma's been a prime trade candidate. Losing Daniel Gafford, looking at what he's doing in Dallas, kind of big considering he's 25. There's kind of issues up and down that roster. They weren't one of the worst teams in the NBA for no reason, right? With that being said, I'm going to go with the skill set that every team needs, which is 3-point shooting and defense. And with that, I'm taking Zachary Richeche. I like him there. I think that Washington, unlike Atlanta, can and probably should consider going in a few different directions with this pick. And I don't think there's any that stand out that's immediately the wrong one. But for Richeche, I think he's someone I'm high on as a 6'10 guy who's young, can shoot the ball and play good defense. His shooting's been up and down. But at the end of the day, when you're a team like Washington, to get a guy that can help be hopefully a part of your long-term blueprint, I think is solid. And again, with 3-and-D skills, every good team has one. Most teams need one, and Washington is no exception. So I feel like you bet on the upside being 19 and just try to fill out the rest of your team from there.
Yeah, I like this pick a lot too. And on my YouTube mock draft, I had Donovan Clingan going number 2 to the Wizards, but it was right there with him and Riza Shea because I like the fit a lot. I think that if there's one thing that we've sort of learned from the Wizards' new front office over the last couple of years, it's that they really value this kind of, long, rangy wing who can defend, who's a good athlete, who can handle the ball a little bit, right? Like Kyle Kuzma, Denny Avdia, Bilal Koulibaly. They're all sort of, in that same mold.
Yeah.
And Riza Shea can be in that same idea as well. So I like what you're going for. I think that if you draft him, with 3 of him, Denny, Kuzma, and Bilal, DC should figure out their wing rotation for the foreseeable future.
I like that. No, I appreciate you saying that. It means a lot. And yeah, I'm really high on that look, for that squad. I think that it's something that, potential. They're not there's no one here, I think, that immediately changes this Wizards team's fortune, right? But it's really about building the right pieces and Clean. And I liked how you explained it. I think he's a good fit too. But yeah, either way, like you said, a few guys, and so I'm glad we explored this option.
So number 3 to Houston, this would be, both in this mock and I think in real life as well, because I expect our top 2 to go as the actual top 2. I'm going to go with Matas Buzelis to Houston at number 3. The way I'm looking at the Rockets roster right now, I can understand why people like the idea of Reed Shepherd in Houston. I really do. But that's also why I like Buzelis, because I think that they need somebody who can play off the ball, who is a decent athlete, who's going to be able to shoot, cut, rebound, just be active off the ball, adding up the little things here and there. Somebody who has some sort of defensive presence. They don't need to be a stopper or a killer on that end of the floor, but just be able to contribute. And then what really gives Buzelis the edge for me over somebody like Shepherd or maybe Rob Dillingham, I just like the idea of Houston being big. I think they have to be big and long. Jalen Green is never going to be the best defender, I think. Fred VanVleet, even though he's not going to be there for the long term, he's still going to be there for the short term. And he competes on defense for sure. He's a good defender, but he's under 6 feet. So you need length and size around him. And yeah, with both of them, Şengün at the 5, who's also not the biggest and the most athletic. I like the idea of Buzelis at 3.
I like that too. I think, like you said, the versatility he provides is good, right? And for a team in Houston that, I mean, I don't want to say trying to contend, but they're definitely not trying to rebuild. They're definitely trying to get a playoff spot. Let's put it that way. Contending for a playoff spot is solid, and Buzelis does bring, an interesting skill set. The requisite athletic ability, like you said, good size. Love the signs of perimeter shooting he's brought. So no, I think that's a really good one. And a nice solid fit as well. Right. So number 4, San Antonio Spurs. This is interesting because I have a guy normally. I mean, when we draft him, I'll talk about how I am on. But given what the Spurs need, I think at this point they have 2 picks. I think one of them they should wind up with a guard. I think it's been kind of talked about for a bit, right? Trey Jones was solid, but like he's not the answer there. And what's sad is that he looked like so much better with Wembanyama. Wembanyama looks so much better with him on the floor than anyone else because he's actually, even though he's not a great guard, like a very competent point guard. And that's just the base level for Wembanyama. So trying to find a guy who can kind of fit in alongside of that. For the number 4 pick, this is tough. I'm gonna go with the guy I'm high on. I'm gonna go with Rob Dillingham. I like him. I was gonna go with another Kentucky guard. We'll let him get picked when he gets picked. But I wanted to go with my own gut. And on this end, I think the Spurs probably would make this pick if Reed Shepherd wasn't available. But and correct me if I'm wrong, Wilko. Like I know defensively is a problem. The dude can score, and I think it's an NBA ready skill off the top that I'm so high on translating at the next level. And I just feel like having a guy who can make the right pass too. He's not, I'd say he's more of a combo guard, but I see some kind of upside. It's like a really high end version of that. If he can kind of refine his game a little bit, but like he'll have defensive cover over Wembanyama. He'll be able to score the ball really, really well. And he's not one of those guys who just scores. He makes really, I'd say, surprisingly high level passing reads as well.
Yeah, this is this is a pick I love. I mean, I have
Okay.
Rob going number 4 to the Spurs as well.
Okay. Yes.
I'm aware as well that Rob and his camp are, at least to the best of my knowledge, trying everything that they can for the Spurs to be interested in him at number 4
Mhm.
because, that pairing with Victor, like you mentioned, is just so appealing. Both guys are creative. They do things on the floor that you don't really see too often, right? Like with Dillingham, I remember before the season, I was just very skeptical about him because even though he was so fun to follow,
Mhm.
I had been watching him since high school, and some of the shots and decisions that he took, it's like you wouldn't even see them on YouTube mixtapes sometimes because he would just like play in his own world so much sometimes that it was sort of off-putting in a weird way
Mhm.
because the talent level was so high, but like I don't know, like basketball is a team sport, right? And like
Yeah.
when I was watching him, I didn't really get that vibe. But
Yeah.
once he got to Kentucky, that buy-in was massive. And I was just so impressed by the way that Rob fit in around everybody on that roster. He was able to make himself better and he made those around him better as well. And like you said, the defense is definitely going to be an issue and it's going to be a concern for many, many years, maybe for his entire career. Like
Possibly. Yeah.
even Trey Young, right? Like I thought Trey Young didn't have a passable defensive season until probably this year. And even that, like, depending on who you talk to, could be a stretch. So Rob is always going to have issues on defense, but like you said, I'm just banking on that scoring and creativity to bend defenses regardless.
Yeah, I'm with you. And like you said, I'm glad you pointed the defense because that's a big issue that not it's not understated. It's an issue and it's going to continue to be one. But you brought up the growth that he's had as a player, and from like watching him, like you said, you've been following him a lot longer than myself. But OTE even before then, it definitely was that highlight reel, like YouTube mixtape type that doesn't actually translate on the NBA floor, or even at the college level. And for it to actually work like in a really potent way, yeah, I thought that was different, right? And I think the same thing. Like that skill set is going to be great. And yeah, defensive, I do worry. I think it's not for lack of effort. It's honestly just the sheer physical attributes or lack thereof that go against him. And the fact that as good as his speed is in the offensive end, I don't know if he leverages it well defensively, you know?
Yeah,
But
agreed. And I think he came in at like 165 or something like that at the combine. So yeah, just really skinny.
wow. Yeah, that's gonna be wild. So we'll see kind of what they continue, I guess, what he continues to look like. And player team fit's gonna be really, really huge for him. But I am really pumped and glad that you have him here and that was gonna give me a number 4. But let's move on to number 5.
So at number 5, I have, similar to Sar at the top, this is somebody who is higher on my mock than in reality on my big board. But again, I like the fit here a lot. And I'm going to go with Dalton Connect from
Okay.
Tennessee at number
Ooh,
5 to Detroit, which don't get me wrong, it's on the higher side, 100%, right? Like, I
I like
think
it.
that in reality, he'll probably go closer to that number 10-ish spot. But with Detroit, I'm seeing a team who has really, really, really struggled, not just this season, which was obviously terrible, but for the past, I don't know, since I started floor and ceiling, I feel like Detroit has just been in a terrible spot.
Mm,
And we saw this season how, once they got in some older, more ready players at the trade deadline, I believe, the team looked a little bit better, with the likes of Simone Fontecchio coming in and stuff like that. So I'm going with Dalton Connect, who after 5 years in college, he's 23 years old. You know what you're getting from him. He's a bucket. He's going to be able to shoot the three at the NBA level. He's going to be able to use, ball screens here and there, run the pick and roll, a few times a game. He's athletic. He can rebound. He can dunk the ball. On defense, I mean, the outlook isn't that great, but
yeah.
his arms are long. I think he will, compete in an NBA setting, especially because like he'll have the ball less in his hands than he did at Tennessee.
Mm.
So my idea in theory is that he'll have more energy to use on the defensive end in the NBA. So yeah, I'm going with Connect, ready-made option, more mature. not as flashy, maybe a little less upside, but for a team like the Pistons, which really needs to improve, and I think they need to show to their fans, importantly, that there's a tangible improvement on the floor, going with Connect is something that I think makes sense.
No, I agree. NBA ready scoring level to another guy, like you said. You've seen the sample size definitely been large, and yeah, known quantity is not a bad thing, right? I like the fact that he did go higher on your board because you're right. I have him more in the middle, middle of the lottery kind of deal. But to have a guy that is going to score, one of the best shooters in this class, like gets buckets, yeah, I think that's an addition a team needs. So no, I like it. Even it being like maybe a higher pick, not by much, it's still really really solid and something Detroit could definitely use. All right, so number 6, I already know who I want for Charlotte here. I'm really high on this guy. He's definitely up on my personal big board, but the Charlotte Hornets going to take Ron Holland from G League Ignite. I know he's been all over the map for NBA mock drafts. I've seen him as high as top 5. I've seen him low as late lottery and everywhere in between. But in my mind, dude's 18. Was at one point the number one player in his high school class, still a strong prospect. I love his motor, love his defensiveness, I love the aggressiveness and the ability to score, the instincts to score. The shooting is an issue. I don't think the shot's horrible. It's not going down. I saw them like 25 of 90 from 3 or something. Like, yeah, 25% is not great from 3, but I think you're in a situation where you can run with the Charlotte Hornets. You can actually bring some defensive aptitude there alongside a guy like a Brandon Miller. And if you do figure out the scoring, I think that unlocks even more for him in a way that he can grow alongside this young team. And you have a Charlotte Hornets team that's been through a lot of upheaval. Right now, you have a new ownership, new front office, a new head coach, a guy who comes in, with that requisite grit, and I think fits right in alongside these guys and kind of helps fill that swingman position. Depending on where you see Brandon Miller as a 2-3, I feel like Holland could be a 3-4. They both could kind of do that combo guard-esque. It'd be like a dollar store version of Kawhi PG, in its completed form, I guess.
I like this idea. Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing that you touched on, and Charlotte would be getting this with Ron, is that they need somebody who's going to help kind of turn that franchise around, right? Because the perception, both from the inside and from the outside, as it regards the Charlotte Hornets, has been very negative for a while. And I think that we saw that even, as recently as this past season. Like, Charlotte is going to have a very tough time attracting free agents. I don't think they really have many assets to go out and be an impact player in the trade market, right? Like, I'm not sure that happens unless they want to trade LaMelo Ball or Brandon Miller, but I don't think you're getting a star better than them at any point.
Yeah.
So with Ron Holland, like I mentioned at the very top of this podcast, there is definitely a world out there where he really blows up, where his potential, really shines, and he develops into that, secondary or maybe even primary option. Because even though I have some issues with the way that Ron makes decisions on the floor sometimes, like I think he can reduce his dribbles still and his vision. He's not selfish because I think he likes to share the ball. He's not
Yeah.
selfish,
Mm-hmm.
but just the way that he executes his reads sometimes it can be a little bit late, or like the window can close because he didn't read the right rotation and things like that.
Yeah.
But it's going to be a process for him. But just the fact that I remember watching him when he was at Duncanville High School in Texas, and when he first got into the USA basketball youth mini camps or whatever you want to call them, right? Like the under 16, under 17 tournaments. At that point when I first ever watched Ron, he seemed to me like a very undersized big, because the only things he could do at a high level on the floor were sort of like competing his ass off, which he does to this day. He's going to be the guy who runs the hardest, who dives on the floor, who chases the rebounds, who does X, Y, and Z all the time. But at that time, like, he was not able to even like shoot a spot up at a high level.
Wow.
So to get to the point now where he's, willing to shoot off the bounce and he can pull up off a crossover and like break his man down off the dribble, it's real improvement. So yeah, I'm in on Ron, and I like this pick.
I appreciate that. No, it's solid. And like you said, I'm glad like bringing some additional context on what you saw from him and how he's grown. Because yeah, to be basically like a hustle big man, being in basically a swingman body, to being a guy who like you can actually sort of squint and project to being maybe a high end go to, well, not a go to guy, but a high end ancillary wing player. Yeah, speaks to the growth, and I obviously hope that continues.
So you've made things difficult for me here because I wasn't sure where you would go at number six.
Yeah, I threw a little loop in there.
But at number seven, I'm gonna go with somebody who I'm actually pretty high on, especially on offense. And this is gonna be the third Frenchman off the draft board. At number seven, I'm gonna go with Tijan Salon. He plays for Cholet in France. 18 years old, one of the youngest players in this draft. Super, super raw to the point where sometimes you're watching him on the court and he doesn't even really know where to go on the floor. But he is just somebody who, similar to Ron Holland, actually, I really trust his trajectory of improvement. I think that he's a dog on the court. All the intel about him off the court as well comes out, looking great. He's from a basketball family, so all of that also is something that NBA teams tend to really like. And even though Portland, you know, they're in the middle of a rebuild, I think that they're not deep enough into the rebuild to the point where they can really like sacrifice positions. So I'm going with somebody who's just maybe a boom or bust type of prospect, but if his high potential plays out, Salon can be someone who plays 3 to 5 in the NBA, in my opinion, who's going to be able to shoot the three ball, pass a little bit. And even though his defense right now is awful, the tools are definitely there for some major improvements.
I like that. I like it. Like you said, went a little high, but I like the upside play. And I think you told me on him as far as what he brings. He's a guy I've been really kind of focusing on recently. Because I didn't know a whole lot about him. And so, like you said, that untapped potential there is really good. And offensively, another solid guy. Francis really put out a lot of these like bigger forward types that shoot the ball really well, kind of work really well. I think he's like the weakest of the defenders of the three we've talked about. Well, we only talked about one in this draft with Ricochet, but we reference Wembanyama. But yeah, that's a good one. Okay. Whew, all right, here we are. Another top. Yeah, I feel like it's all changed now. So number 8, the San Antonio Spurs. We already went with the guard. And so I feel rough going with another, but I do feel that's like the biggest area of need. And also Rob Dillingham. This is where I feel like I outdid myself. Like I draft Rob Dillingham because I'm high on him, but also I don't like he's not ready to be the starting point guard right now. And maybe that's not his role. Maybe he's like a really good microwave combo guard. This is tough. I think I'm gonna throw it up. I'm gonna spice it up, go in a different direction. It might cause more issues for they have to figure out what they're gonna do with some of their wings anyway. But the Spurs are gonna reach a little bit here and go with Cody Williams from Colorado.
Okay.
Yeah, you like it? Okay. I mean, he was the guy who's fluctuated all over draft boards. I know it was like a 2-week span where he was like talks about going number 1. Obviously the brother Jalen Williams, like his size, like his defensive ability. Not really, I don't really like his shooting. Haven't seen a whole lot of it, right? Really low volume. Obviously, to me, that doesn't do a lot of confidence in it. But a guy who, in theory, if his shot comes around, but I think you have a guy who's a good connective player. I think that like kind of adds to the connective tissue of the Spurs with that type of ethos, maybe a better version of a Kyle Anderson, at least out the gate with his defensive ability to move the ball, bring the ball up, get you into your offense. I think, kind of diversifying the offensive skill set, especially with the guard in Dillingham and having Wembanyama, who you don't want to take the ball away from. I think you want to kind of encourage it more. That's the pick I'm going to go with. I like it. I think it's a little bit more of a reach than I would, but I am high on Williams' fit in the right system. I think the Spurs provide that right environment.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. And I could see this because right now, like, even though they just got Wemby, right? Like, I think the Spurs should be very open to, kind of like rebuilding their entire roster again around him. and they shouldn't really feel like very boxed in to keeping, like Keldon Johnson or Devin Vassell, right? Like they're both good players, but if an upgrade is available or if a trade that makes sense in exchange for assets is there, then I'm open to trading either of those guys or like Jeremy Sohan as well, for example. Like he's someone who I'm open to moving on, right? And I think that the biggest difference with Cody Williams and someone like Sohan or maybe someone like Stefan Castle who would, be available in this range,
Yes.
I trust the shot a little bit more because
Mm.
even though the volume is so low, like you mentioned,
Mm-hmm.
I really like his touch at the rim. He makes some really tough shots at the rim that I think, show real touch. And also, when he has shot from three or from the mid range, they've gone in, generally speaking.
Yeah.
So I think the means are there for him to grow as a shooter.
Mm-hmm.
But it's definitely going to be a mentality thing too, because the volume really needs to go up.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I'm with you on that. That's one of those things that it needs to build. We need to see some more there for sure. And I guess I'm hopeful of that. I think the Spurs again give the environment where maybe you can work with a good shot doctor. I know they don't have drawing a blank on his name. The great Chip England. There we go. Like they're a great shooting coach over these years, but like the culture that they have built and established. That you definitely got to bet on some of the swing skills, the upside, the development. But that stands right now, at the very least, an intriguing player.
Number 9, I'm gonna keep it real brief because this is very clear to me. If this actually plays out how it's played out in real life, then I think it's a no-brainer for them to go Donovan Clingan here
Mm.
because he would be, in my eyes, maybe not in year 1, but in year 2 or 3, a great starter next to Jaren Jackson Jr. I think that with Triple J, ultimately he's at his best at the 4, um, especially defensively, because even though I understand why people think that NBA Twitter or whatever is a little bit harsh on Jaren Jackson's rebounding, but I genuinely think it can be an issue. I'm not gonna lie. Like I don't think he's a good enough rebounder to sustain that front court by himself if Memphis is going to be a legit contender. So drafting somebody like Donovan Clingan here, who fits in on offense next to John Morant, who can give the Grizzlies that rebounding boost, that defensive boost as well. It's something that I absolutely love. And if Clingan lands in Memphis, then I could see this fit playing out similarly to Derek Lively in Dallas this year.
Wow. Yeah. No, that's a good, like you said, like a good impact pick. Guy coming in immediately, like fitting. Yeah, I think that's a solid one as well. I think the comparison you just did with Lively in terms of the immediate jolt is big when you hear it, but also think about what they've needed, right? Like it has been a big to get in. They traded Steven Adams. They need a guy like that. I think you have a guy in Clingan, like you said, who can really come in, make a big impact. I think he's been showing, I guess, in workouts that he has like a 3-point shot. That's interesting. Not something that we're going to see, huh?
But
That's not what you
it's
drafted
interesting
for. I
enough,
think
but
it's a
it's
nice.
like I want to see that free throw percentage go way up first
Okay.
because let me look at it right now. But he finished the season shooting 58.3% from the free throw line. And for his career, he's a 56% free throw shooter. So in the NBA, that's going to need to go way up, even if he makes no threes.
No, that's absolutely true. You're right. You at the very least. No, that can't even think stretch big if you can't get it down the foul line. Yeah, as a big who's probably gonna get to the free throw line more than shooting threes. So yeah, I feel that for sure. All right, so we're at number 10 now. Utah Jazz. I'm gonna go. They have a lot of smaller ones of these of small. They have a lot of smaller guards. I'm gonna go more with the wing. I think I'm gonna go with Stephon Castle, who I had in a few plays. I'm not super high on Stephon Castle, namely because you hear all the stuff about him want to be a point guard. I don't really see that there. I also don't see a guy whose shot looks great. I see more like a defensive minded wing with some playmaking upside. that like obviously it's not where he sees himself. That's great. Love the confidence, but I think he's going to be a right system guy because I don't think you draft him as a point guard. I think you draft him as like what Chris Dunn ultimately became, which is ironic since Chris Dunn's on the Jazz. But like when he was drafted, you looked at the point guard for the future for the Timberwolves and later the Bulls, really more like a wing kind of guy, undersized wing, defensive minded, who can get you in your offense and can handle the ball. I think that's what Stephon Castle projects to me. There is room to grow offensively. I think he has more to go, but I don't know what that looks like, and I'm just not high from what I've seen. But I think when you have a lot of smaller offensive-minded guards in Utah, you get a guy like Stephon Castle who you can deploy as a bigger wing. I think him and Chris Dunn in the backcourt would be kind of nasty if you wanted to kind of shut down opposing offensive perimeter creators. And I think he's in a spot where the pressure is not on him to have to do more offensively. He can kind of still play within his role, refine his shooting, make plays off of a closeout, second side pick and roll, things like that, and kind of grow as, the team is still steered around Larry Marketing and whoever they continue to go through in the offseason.
Yeah, I like this pick. I think Utah is pretty early on in its rebuild as well. And also, I'm with you. I don't think Castle is a point guard. But if he was, to go to Utah in this spot, I think that, like I just said, they are early enough in their rebuild to where he would get plenty of reps handling the ball. And those would be good for his long-term development. But I'm with you, though. Like, I think more of an off-ball sort of connective role makes sense. And, sparing the athletic differences aside, I think that if we look at rookies from this season who, did some stuff on the court for their team, and I think Castle can have a similar impact. I'm looking at guys like Amen Thompson for the Rockets or Anthony Black for Orlando. I think that Castle should sort of be looking to base his impact off of what they did.
I muted myself there. I said I like that, and those are some good comps too of guys to kind of look up to and play. And I know obviously that's not who he sees himself as right now, but ultimately kind of last long in this league with his skill set as it stands right now. I think that'll be wise.
11, we have Chicago, and I think they gotta tear everything up, start over. So I'm gonna go BPA, best player available here. This guy for me is someone who is very much in contention for number 1 on my big board. So getting him at 11, might be the steal of the night for me.
Okay.
I'm going with Isaiah Collier out of USC because, the way I'm looking at things, if I was running the Chicago Bulls, I'm starting from scratch. And with Collier, I understand the questions about his turnovers, especially early on in the year. I understand, the hesitance behind drafting a lead point guard who has not proven himself to be a good shooter. I can understand like the apprehension there.
Mm-hmm.
But with Collier, I think, of all the guys that we've mentioned so far, he's probably the most physically ready for the NBA. I mean, he's built like a Mack truck in a point guard's body. He can move defenders around. He can get paint touches very easily. He's going to be able to thrive in NBA spacing and in NBA pace in particular. I think he's going to be tremendous in transition because he's going to have the chance to play in the open court so much more than he did at USC. And if Chicago got Collier at 11, then I'm looking at a situation similar to Tyrese Maxey and the Sixers, where you have a guard who really, slides, but can return that top 5, top 10 value later on.
No, I like that. That's a solid one. And I knew you were higher on Collier. I liked him. I think a lot of the flack he kind of got was because of his system. I did wish he played at a faster pace, just given like know your personnel, KYP there. But at the same time, yeah, no, I agree exactly with you. And the upside is there for him. And I like making this play again, more of an upside guy, but also a fit. This is, like you said, best player available. This is a good fit for what they are looking for. And like you said, if you consider him still the draft, like, hey, I think wherever he falls, if he goes this, I mean, he's a guy not in my top 10, but he has been my top 10 most of the year. And a guy I think that you look back and you're like, you see his physical gifts, you see what he does with the ball. You can't help it. Yeah, I think he's a good pick there. All right, so now we are at the Oklahoma City Thunder. They can go a lot of places here. They got a lot of depth. They got a lot of guys to go choose from. But I looked at them this year, and I did not like. I didn't like this all year, but I think we also saw some playoffs where PJ Washington, Daniel Gafford, and Derek Lively just beat up on them on the boards. They needed help. This is maybe the one time where the criticism that was kind of lofted at the Thunder when they made the pick for why am I forgetting his name now? Exactly. Chet Holmgren. When they made the pick for Chet Holmgren, a lot of it was like, oh, what about him handling the paint and all the things? Obviously, he did really well for himself. The problem is Dallas had 3 big guys, right? And the Thunder as a team were very, very small. So we're gonna go a little bit higher here. We're gonna draft Zach Edey out of Purdue.
Okay.
Yeah, again, another solid guy, a big dude. I think he's more of a role player. That's fine. Thunder, that's fine. Like Thunder have cap space. The Thunder have draft picks. The Thunder can get stars if they want that. Also, no, you're not really necessarily getting a star in this class, at least on the onset where you're at. But what you have right now is a play finisher. You have a monster screener. You have a guy up in the boards. You have just extra beef in the middle. And I think OKC can definitely make an upside play and go with the guy who's already, at 22, a pretty solid all-around player. Well, not all-around player, but pretty solid player at the big position. There you go.
This is really interesting because I was thinking about, or I considered Edey to the Thunder as well for my mock draft on YouTube. I considered it too. And like, I understand all of your reasoning and like all of it makes a lot of sense. So let me just ask you this, right?
Yeah.
Because you said you were comfortable drafting him if he turns out to be a backup. If OKC, drafted Edey here and they got their own version of someone like Ivica Zubac, who can play a lot in the regular season, but in the playoffs, maybe their minutes count goes down to like 20-ish minutes a game, something like that, or like against the wrong matchup, he might not even play, but he's still a very valuable member of the roster for the entire season.
Yeah.
Is that an outcome that you would feel good about?
That's a good question. I feel in the moment I want to say yes because obviously playoff situational matchups, right? And you get guys who don't play a lot in one series, who will in another, or kind of how you deploy them. And I get the stigma that might be attached to a guy that's a lottery draft pick, not playing big minutes down the stretch. But I think even Derek Lively, had moments where he wasn't playing. If Maxi Kleber wasn't injured, who knows how many minutes he'd be playing in this, right? He's been a really good impact player, but Maxi Kleber provides more scoring, more flexibility. PJ Washington, the same thing. You have those 2 guys that you're 4 and 5, and then you have Daniel Gafford and Lively kind of platooning, right? And that doesn't understate the impact that Lively's made, but I guess kind of taking that and applying it over to Clingan, like you said, I feel like he'd be an impact player. I feel like you're right. There might be some matchups where he's not on the floor. And I think that would be okay, given the depth of players that OKC have, both Jalen Williams, you have Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, you have Cason Wallace, who just drafted, whatever you do with Josh Giddey or whoever you get back for Josh Giddey, like you're gonna have a lot of depth. And so to have a guy like Edey, who, situationally, you're playing the Dallas Mavericks, bring him out. You're playing the Minnesota Timberwolves, bring him out. Even the Denver Nuggets, to throw another look at Nikola Jokic, bring him out. And then for other matchups, he might not play a lot, but I think at the end of the day, that his impact is going to be there. I think it's a solid one. I like that question though, because you're right. Contextualization is important when you make these picks, but I think for a Thunder team that is really with a blank canvas right now, you can play with that, and I think that he could really help them.
All right, I'm with it. But now, we have 2 draft picks left, and there's a few prospects, at least 4 or 5 who, 2 or 3 of those are not going to get picked. And
that's crazy. I know, it's wild. I was thinking
I'm just trying to figure out, which ones I can afford to not draft,
to let go. Yeah.
So with Sacramento at 13, there's a few things I'm considering here, right? Like, I think the biggest 2 kind of have to be De'Aaron Fox and Domantas Sabonis, just because they're the 2 guys who have brought Sacramento back to relevancy, honestly, like, to put it bluntly. I think that they, brought the Kings back to being relevant in a playoff context. So you have those two guys, and then Malik Monk is somebody who is or has been a very important piece for them. I believe that his contract is up this summer. Let me look it up just in
Malik
case.
Monk, yeah, he's free. He's out. Yep.
So
Or he is,
he's
yeah.
a free agent this summer. And, I'm wondering too whether Sacramento could use that sort of injection of scoring off the bench if they cannot keep Malik Monk.
Mhm.
But getting that in the draft at this point is just tough, I think, especially because, like, if you asked me who could fit that role in the draft, then, like, I would probably be thinking Rob Dillingham, Isaiah Collier, or like Dalton Connect as that kind of
Mhm.
microwave scorer, and all of
Yeah.
those guys are gone off the draft board now.
Yeah.
Reed Shepard is an option here,
I can't believe he
and
slipped us this far. I don't know why. I'm not. I know. I don't know on my end.
picked
I know
him.
it's a situational thing. We'll talk about it in a second. But yeah.
It's a very situational thing because, like, once pick number 13 rolls around on draft night, I don't think Reed Shepard is going to be available. But for Sacramento, I don't see the fit. I don't really see the fit.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna go with Kyle Filipowski here. Um,
Oh wow. Okay. Okay.
this is somebody who I've been a little bit higher on, I think, than the consensus throughout both of his draft cycles. Because even last season, before he returned to college, I think I had like a top 20-ish grade on him or something like that. But I was pretty high on him throughout the process. So with him at 13 to Sacramento, just kind of like thinking out loud and talking through the pick here. I'm seeing Domantas Sabonis, and I'm seeing a lot of guys on the roster who you're gonna have, complementing his game. So if you bring in Flip, who is another big that can kind of, like pop out to the perimeter, and he can pass the ball and spray it out and like run dribble handoffs, or like, make passes out of short rolls, or like if he's cutting to the basket, he can scan the floor and stuff like that. There's some continuity there with his skill set and Sabonis's, which I like. So given that Sacramento is in playoff contention, I'm gonna go with him, bit more mature, bit more ready, but somebody who, the more I think about it, the more I can see him kind of fitting in that ethos that the Kings have going on.
That's a solid one. I'm with you. I get it. I think again, that's what makes draft so interesting. Cause I'm feeling the pressure looking at you make this pick and also trying to say, okay, this guy goes here, this guy goes here. It's tough. There's some good guys that are still falling out, but given again the context and the fact that this is situational for a lot of these teams, and honestly, a lot of it just because of the way the lottery balls bounced, right? Like that's kind of why they are where they are. It does make it so interesting. Where it's not going to be all nice and neat, and I think that adds some more spice to it. But I like that fit. I think it is a nice kind of different look at the big position. Another offensive guy who kind of emulate some of the hub activity there, and bigs who could shoot, pass, and dribble. Like at the end of the day, I want to see him shoot a little bit more. I want to see them go down a little bit more. But at the end of the day, like that's a skill set that is needed in the NBA. That's coveted in the NBA. And if you can get that, especially this late in the draft, for a team that's contending for playoff spots, like you do it. All right.
Yeah, and like similar to Zach Edey to OKC.
Yes.
I'm comfortable drafting Filipowski and just shoring up my big off the bench.
Yeah.
Because Sabonis is always going to be the starter, so I'm more than fine with that.
No, I think that makes a whole lot of sense, and it's one of those things, like you said, it kind of solidifies that for you, and you have at least some. What is the word I'm looking for? Well, I can't think right now. Like there is a balance of the same type of play style emulated. There you go, off the bench, and it's not just like a just straight drop off from a guy like Sabonis to a guy like Alex Len. All due respect to Alex Len, of course, but yeah, like that. All right, this has been tough. This has been fun. This has been tough. And this last pick, Portland Trailblazers. Yeesh. Okay, so I'm looking at them. I mean, obviously right now at the center spot they're good. DeAndre Ayton's not going anywhere. Whether because contract, trade value, whatever the case may be. You have a plethora of guards, and I'm hesitant to draft another guard here. But I'm going to. Well, he's not really a guard. I'm going to go with a guard forward type. And this is again, you're looking at a guy to kind of come in. You need to make a decision between one of Anthony Simons, Shaden Sharp. Of course, you have Scoot Henderson. Can't play all three. Can't really play all three when three of them play the same two positions. And I don't really see one coming off the bench. So I think you draft this player, and then that kind of initiates making the move. And maybe it is Simons, who said that he does want to play for a winning team at 26. Is not probably going to find that in Portland in the next couple of years. And so I'm going to go here with the 14th pick for Portland is Jacoby Walter out of Baylor. Yeah, he could shoot 19. Got a little bit of size on him, can swing between the shooting guard, small forward position. He's a movement shooter. I think guy can run off of screens, kind of bounce out a little bit, maybe get some diversification in your offense. If you do keep Shaden Sharp at the 2, obviously Scoot handles the ball. You have a guy in Jacoby who can make it happen without having to have the ball in his hands. And I think opening up the floor a little bit will expand the skill set for a guy like DeAndre Ayton to work on the basket. You release some pressure off a guy like Scoot Henderson. I think it'll just kind of bounce the team out a little bit more. Now, obviously, I'm saying all of that with the idea then that the Portland Trailblazers would then move Anthony Simons, right? Or Shaden Sharp. I wouldn't do Sharp, but you could. But that is why I make that pick. I think they need an actual small forward, and I think getting Jacoby Walter, who can play the 2, but I want him at the 3, actually play the 3, is a solid pick.
This is an interesting pick. I really like your reasoning behind it because, yeah, I mean, Portland is in a slightly tricky spot almost, having to draft twice in the lottery. Yeah, I don't know. Like you said, whoever they draft at 7, I don't think they want overlap at 14, but also they just have, a lot of overlap even already on the roster. Like you said, they're gonna have to figure this out and kind of, parse through each player or whatnot. But yeah, I mean, just with Scoot, Brogdon, Anthony Simons, Shaden Sharp, Tamani Kamara, Matisse Thybulle, Ryan Rupert, all of these guys, you have a bunch of guards, and then you have a bunch of defensive wings, and then you have DeAndre Ayton, Robert Williams, and Duop Reith, who are the bigs. Yep. So I like the idea of drafting Jacoby here. He's somebody who the roster doesn't really have somebody who plays like him. I mean, maybe Chris Murray a little bit, but Jacoby is a higher, more valued prospect, I think, than Chris Murray is. So I like this a lot. He's somebody who is going to be able to thrive in the NBA without the ball in his hands. I think his 3-point shooting is a lot better than his final percentages kind of ended up indicating, because he was taking, some tough looks. I'm not going to lie. And when you take those tough looks and when you take those movement threes and, when you're fading to the corner with a hand right in your face, you're going to miss, especially, being 18, 19. So I like this pick for Jacoby. I like this pick for Portland as well. Just means that, we left Reed Shepherd and Nikola Topic off the lottery entirely.
Which is crazy.
But it's wide open,
It's
wide open.
Yes. This I gotta say, this is a lot of fun. As an exercise, you're right. Because I kept seeing, especially Shepherd's side. Topic I thought high about for San Antonio. I wasn't thinking about him for San Antonio once I got Rob. Now we're just taking that Kentucky backcourt, the backup backcourt, and putting them in San Antonio with neither projecting to be that clear starter, at least initially. But I was gonna say, what team, real quick, as we kind of look back with wrapping this up, what team do you think, either for myself or you looking back, either of those players could have made a better fit for? I think we both gave good reasoning, but I'm definitely curious on I guess what teams you saw. Because even on mock drafts, I think this one I liked. I didn't look at any mocks as I did this, just looked at who had been drafted. I think we both did. Looked at who had been drafted and just kind of kept it moving. But looking at it now, who would you kind of consider as the best fit for both of those players?
So I think for Topic, I have it pretty clear that either Utah at 10 or Chicago at 11 I think that would be the best situation for him because he could go into those organizations and be given the ball because they don't have a point guard that he would have to fit around. Um, and if he has to do that, then I worry that his weaknesses or his improvement points would sort of come to the light a lot more. Because he would be having to like play off the ball and spot up and defend a lot more, and like that's not really his strengths.
Yeah.
So I think Utah or Chicago for Topic, and then for Reed Shepherd, Houston at number 3 is something that I keep going back to. I feel like that makes sense.
I like that too. Yeah.
And like if the Spurs drafted a wing at 4,
which I was thinking I should have done. Yeah, exactly. I went high on Rob because I'm high on Rob, but you're right.
Then maybe at number 8, it could make sense. But I don't know. I don't know. Reed has an interesting game. Reed has an interesting game where it's like it both fits next to a lot of other people, but it also like has drawbacks when it comes to NBA size and length and positionality more than anything.
Yeah.
So it's gonna be fascinating to see his NBA translation.
Oh, absolutely. It's one of those things I'm most looking forward to kind of watching, like where they fit in, how the draft looks with these guys selected, the projected fit before you even see what that looks like. Because you're right. A guy like Reed, a solid player, all these guys solid players, but it is fit dependent, context dependent. And I think even making these picks, there's a lot that goes into it. And so that makes it a lot of fun. But Wilko, man, thank you for hopping on, joining me. It was a pleasure, obviously, to have you on, a pleasure to be able to do this with you. A lot of fun. Real quick, before I let you go, can you tell the good people again where they can find you and your work? Because we'll have it linked, but I want all the plug-in.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Wilko MCV on Twitter, Wilko MCV, Twitter, X, whatever you call it. I'm gonna keep calling it Twitter.
Same.
Florence Celing on YouTube, at Florence Celing. If you just type it into like the YouTube URL, but if you just put it on the search bar, Florence Celing NBA Draft, I should pop up. We just passed 5,000 subscribers earlier today, actually. So that was dope. Great to see. Good to see excitement for this draft cycle. And yeah, man, appreciate you having me on, Corban. Appreciate you reaching out. And this has been a lot of fun.
Oh, I'm so glad, man. It's been a pleasure. We have to do this again sometime. A lot of fun for sure. Appreciate you. And like I said, check out the guy. Like his content is amazing. Check him out on Twitter. Like I said, I'll have the latest mock draft he did there, as well as the link to just no overall YouTube channel. So hopefully we get more than 5,000 subscribers coming up real soon. You'll get that whether or not anyone from this side subscribes, but I can't wait, bro. And again, thank you so much. For myself, y'all follow me on Twitter at Corban NBA, Corban NBA. Check out the great guys at Switch Theory, at Switch Theory, online switchtheory.com. Draft content coming up there too. In fact, I think I just put in my big board to like start the draft guide that we're doing there. So that'll be fun. Just be on the lookout for that. And obviously more shows on the Switch Theory podcast feed like this coming up as we really dive deeper and deeper into the draft before the draft comes in just under a month or just over a month now. I'm very excited about that. But listen, y'all, again, been a blast. Really appreciate y'all rocking with us here. For Wilko, for myself, we are Frosty. Y'all stay frosty, and we'll talk to y'all real soon. All right, y'all.